When we have built our scene and made our animation, put our lights on, put our materials on, and our textures and everything, then we can do a test render. And we have these buttons up here. And this one here will open the render view. And the one here will do the render. So if I click that, you can see it'll open the render view and it'll render an example image of the same thing it's seeing here. Right? You will see that the same sort of buttons that are here are also here. So if you are just tweaking stuff, you can re-render by clicking up there. Rendering is sort of like developing your film. So that is the step you make to get nice looking pictures, or hopefully nice looking pictures, out of your efforts in modeling and texturing and animation and lighting and everything. The default in Maya is to use the renderer called Maya Software. It's an old renderer. It's not very advanced by today's standards, but it works okay, and that's what we're going to use today, and then we'll talk about other options. So you can see there's a drop-down menu here, and that will contain renders depending on what you have installed and what plugins are active in your version of Maya. So there's also Maya Hardware that will render the image using the graphics card. There's Vector that will render a special type of vector format that can be set up to export Flash and other stuff. It's sort of like not being used that much anymore. Then there's, you probably have Mental Ray, which is a third-party renderer that comes with Maya. Actually, Maya 2016 is the first version where, in a long time, where it's not installed alongside Maya. Now it's a separate install. I'm not exactly sure the reason for that, but Mental Images that makes Mental Ray was bought by NVIDIA about 2 years ago, so maybe it has something to do with that. Mental Ray is a very nice modern renderer that can do a lot of things. As you can see, it takes slightly longer to render as well. It can do things like global illumination and caustics and final gathering and a lot of other things. Then there's also, in my case, RenderMan Raise and RenderMan Riz, which is these Pixar renders. So Raise is the good old thing that can render things like this. And that will open up its own render preview called IT. So you can see it renders the frame. If I set it to Riz instead, it will not go so well. So you can see that goes black. And that's because the Riz renderer wants to use its own materials and other things like that. There's other popular renderers like V-Ray, Final Render, Arnold. Well, there's a lot of different renders, but it seems like Mental Ray, Arnold, V-Ray, and RenderMan is probably like the most popular ones out there. But today we'll just use Maya Software because that's all we need. So what we'll do is we'll set this up to render out an animation, so we can play it back in the final version. In this section here with different buttons, the one over here with the gear icon on it is the setup for the rendering. So that is where you set up things like what resolution, what quality, what options should there be. So in this case, it will tell me where it's going to put the images. So it's going to put it in C, users, blah, 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 images. And then file name will be named untitled.iff. It's because my scene is called untitled. I haven't saved it yet, so it'll use the file name. That's what it says here, use scene file name. I could also write Peter Pedale, and then you can see it'll use that name instead. So, but if this is blank, it will use the scene file name. That's usually okay. Then the image file format, that is the file type it'll use. The default is Maya IFF, which is a pretty good format. There's a lot of different ones. Don't use AVI, please, or I will have to kill you. And other formats down here. When we're using my software, just go with IFF. If we are rendering with RenderMan, that we'll look at another day, we will be rendering to OpenEXR. It's a file format developed by Lucasfilm, the Star Wars people. So it's an open source software standard. Also, right now we have this frame and animation drop down here, and it says single frame. Now we have an animation with 120 frames, so I don't want to render each frame separately. So I go in here, and I usually choose the one here called name_number. That's what the hashtag means. .ext, that is the extension. So since it's my IFF, it will be named IFF. So you can see now it changes up here. It says file name will be untitled_0001.iff2 untitled_0010.iff. The reason for the zeros is this frame padding thing. It's a good idea to have frame padding, and 4 is sort of the industry standard, so we'll use that. It will do 10 frames at the moment because I have first frame or start frame to 1 and end frame to 10. So obviously I want this to be 120. So now it will do 120 frames. I can choose if I want to render every frame or every third frame or whatever, but it's fine now. Then a very important part here, we have all made this mistake, and you will all make this mistake. I'm not doubting that at all. You have to choose the right camera here. In my case, it's easy because I only use the perspective camera, but I know some of you made custom cameras, camera 1, perspective 1, whatever. Make sure you have the right camera selected here. There can actually be more than one camera, then it will render different camera angles for each frame. But usually you just want one. Then we have the resolution. This is set to like a little funny setting. This is a quarter HD, so it's like if you have a full HD called that is 1920 by 1080, so this would be like quarter of that. It's okay. I'll just use that for now. But this is not a real format. If I were to render something I would use, I would probably go and set this to HD 1080 or HD 720. That is the two standards for TV production at the moment. Then there's something about the device aspect ratio and other things. The pixels per inch you can just ignore. That is only interesting if you're doing things for print, so it doesn't matter. And then there's the render options. In here it has enable default light. What that does is that if you create a scene without a light, it will create one for you at render time. If you disable this, then everything will be black. So that's why it's there. That is the common tab. That means that is there no matter what render engine you choose. The other tabs here depend on the render. So you can see this one is my software. If I choose Mental Ray, I get something different. So I'll just use my software, and if I click that, my default is to do custom quality, which is set to low quality. It's fine. I could set it to high quality or motion blur or whatever, but I'll just leave it at this. And I can choose different settings down here. This is where it gets interesting. We won't go into details with this today. So I'll just go close. And now I'm ready to render. So I'll go to my rendering menu set. And I go to render, batch render. Here. And it will go blah, 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 blah. And you just go continue if you get that pop-up. And it says result rendering with my software. So it's just making the file ready, and in a second it will start to give us percentages for how much it has rendered. Hopefully it should do it at some point. You can do it. Come on. There we go. So it's rendering now, and you can see it's rendering frame 1. It's yes. I thought they fixed this bug. You notice that I set this to my software, but there is a weird bug that if I have had RenderMan selected, it will just use RenderMan anyway. So it's rendering this scene with RenderMan at the moment. But that shouldn't happen for you unless you made the same mistake I did. But you can see it's slowly rendering, going through the frames one at a time, rendering. As you can see, a lot of frames. Interesting. It's like it's rendering two different things. Okay, yeah. This thing is that it's generating the shadow map. So, but it's rendering. And we can just take a look at some of the images. Talk to Johan. There. And projects, default, RenderMan, untitled, images in this case. So you can see it started to render frames. And I'll just bring up a frame here. There we go. And as you can see, it's nice and black because I haven't used any RenderMan materials. So that's unfortunate, but it's sort of like a weird little hiccup. Now what I can do is I can just cancel this render. So go render, cancel batch render, yes. There you go, it should be cancelled now. And then I can set the renderer to maybe Mental Ray, because that should render nice and quick as well. There. And then go render, batch render, and go yes. And now it should work. At least it used to work. I hope, maybe, if I'm lucky. But it's a very strange bug, that one. Yeah, now it works. So this is Mental Ray rendering, and you will see that it's actually putting the files in a different place. It's putting it in see, documents, Maya, projects, default, images. So these are the images, and they will actually have light and stuff. So there we go. So it will render for a few days, or well, at least a little while, and then we'll have an animation that we can then put together as a little video. But that's a totally different thing. Yes? No, I've used that my IFF file. So how do you actually use those? Photoshop, After Effects, Nuke, lots of options. So I'll just let it render, and then tomorrow we can try and generate a little video of the result, so that you can see what it really is.